arrogant billionaire boxer forced a black woman to fight to humiliate her. Then the unexpected happened. Hello to my wonderful online family, and welcome back to my channel Story Always. I'm so glad you're here with me today. We all carry stories inside of us, stories of moments that tested us, changed us, and revealed who we truly are. The story you're about to hear is about one of those moments, a clash of worlds that nobody saw coming. It's about pride, dignity, and the incredible strength that can be found in the quietest corners of the human heart. With a microphone in one hand and a diamond-studded glove on the other, the champion scanned the opulent ballroom, her eyes landing on the woman refilling water glasses in the back. A cruel smirk played on her lips as she pointed. "You black nigga. In the ring. Tomorrow night." She expected tears, a quick and brutal humiliation to polish her ego. She never, ever expected a black warrior. The air in the penthouse suite was as sterile as it was expensive. It smelled of imported leather, jasmine-scented diffusers, and a faint metallic tang of loneliness. This was Jasmine, the Viper Vance's kingdom, a glass-walled palace overlooking a city that worshipped her. Below, the lights of Chicago glittered like a carpet of fallen stars, but from 50 stories up, they were just cold, distant specks. Like the people. All of them. Jasmine stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, her reflection a study in sculpted perfection. Her body was a weapon, honed by a decade of ruthless discipline. Every muscle was a testament to sacrifice, every scar a paragraph in her legacy as the undefeated women's featherweight champion of the world. She ran a hand over her tightly braided hair, her fingers tracing the sharp lines that framed a face built for magazine covers and intimidating press conferences. Her publicist, a perpetually nervous man named Leo, called it her $1,000,000 scowl. Jasmine just thought of it as her face. "The car is waiting, Jas," Leo chirped from the doorway, clutching his tablet like a life raft. The gala organizers are ecstatic. They're calling it the social event of the year. Your presence just elevates everything. Jasmine didn't turn. She was watching the way the light caught the championship belt slung over a velvet armchair. It was solid gold, studded with garish gems and heavier than a tombstone. Some days, it felt like one. "Did they agree to the appearance fee?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of the fire she saved for the cameras. "Every last dollar," Leo confirmed eagerly. "And the donation is fully tax-deductible. It's a win-win. You look like a philanthropist, and we write off a fortune. Plus, a camera crew from Global Sports will be there, covering your every move." "Good," Jasmine said, finally turning. She slipped on a silk blazer over her custom-fit dress, the fabric cool against her skin. Every move was precise, economical. There was no wasted energy in Jasmine's world, no room for sentiment. Sentiment was a weakness. It was the thing her father had beaten out of her before she'd ever stepped into a ring. "Feelings don't win fights, girl," he used to rasp, his breath smelling of stale cigars and disappointment. "Tears just make you an easier target." He was right. She hadn't cried in 15 years. She hadn't truly felt much of anything at all, except the cold, clean satisfaction of a perfectly executed knockout and the hollow echo that always followed. As she walked past Leo, she snagged the belt from the chair. It was a prop, just like the smile she'd pasted on her face the moment she stepped out of the elevator. All of it was a performance. The invincibility, the charity, the life of a champion. A beautiful, empty lie. And she was the best in the world at selling it. 17 miles away, in a part of Chicago The penthouse lights never seemed to reach. The air smelled of something entirely different. It smelled of damp soil from the community garden next door, of fried onions from Mrs. Gable's kitchen, and of old wood and linseed oil, a scent that clung to the bones of the building and lived deep in Amara Jones's soul. The Jones Boxing Club sign hung crookedly over the boarded-up entrance. Its red paint faded to a dull, rust-colored memory. The gym wasn't a business anymore. It was a mausoleum. A shrine to the only man who had ever made Amara feel invincible, her father, Samuel Jones. Inside, a single bare bulb illuminated a universe of ghosts. Dust motes danced in the light, settling on the cracked leather of heavy bags that hadn't been struck in 2 years. The ring, the heart of the gym, was shrouded in a gray tarp, its canvas floor holding the phantom weight of 1,000 lessons, 1,000,000 moments of shared sweat and laughter. This was Amara's kingdom. Quiet, forgotten space filled with more love than all of Jasmine Vance's combined. Amara moved through the silence with a grace that belied her simple work uniform black pants, a crisp white shirt. She was here on her break, a ritual she performed 3 times a week. She'd come from her shift at Prestige Catering, where she arranged canapés and refilled champagne flutes for people who had more money in their watches than her father had earned in his entire life. Here, though, she wasn't a caterer. She wasn't invisible. Here, she was Samuel Jones' daughter. She stopped in front of a wall of framed photographs. Her father, broad-shouldered and beaming, with his arm around a young boy who'd won his first Golden Gloves. Her father teaching a group of teenage girls how to wrap their hands. And her favorite, a faded picture of him with a tiny 7-year-old Amara perched on his shoulders, both of them grinning, their faces glistening with sweat. She'd just learned the 1-2 combination that day. He'd called her his little hummingbird because her feet were so light. "It's not about hitting, Gaby girl," he used to tell her, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "It's about balance. Find your center. Know your worth. No one can ever take that from you." She touched the cool glass of the frame, her finger tracing his smile. He died of a heart attack right in the center of that ring, doing what he loved. The medical bills had swallowed the business whole, and now the bank owned the building. They'd given her until the end of the year to clear it out before it was demolished. Every box she packed felt like a betrayal. She was losing him all over again, one dusty trophy at a time. Her phone buzzed, a notification from her boss. "Big gig tonight, Amara. The Children's Hospital Gala at the Regent Grand. All hands on deck. We need you on drinks and glassware." Amara sighed, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. Another night of serving the rich and famous, of being a ghost in the background of their glittering lives. She looked at her hands. They were strong hands, her father's hands, capable of arranging delicate pastries on a tray and capable of so much more. She balled them into fists, just for a second, feeling the familiar pull of muscles that still remembered everything. Then she unclenched them, took a deep breath that tasted of dust and memory, and walked out, locking the door on the only place she ever truly felt at home. Before we see these 2 worlds collide, I want you to think about something. Have you ever felt like the world only saw a small part of who you are, while the most important parts remained hidden? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The Regent Grand Hotel's ballroom was a breathtaking assault on the senses. Cascades of white orchids hung from crystal chandeliers, their cloying perfume mixing with the scent of expensive champagne and the collective self-satisfaction of Chicago's elite. Men in tailored tuxedos, and women in glittering gowns, moved through the space like schools of exotic fish, their laughter bright and sharp. To Jasmine, it was all just noise. A gilded cage filled with chattering monkeys. She was seated at the head table, a queen on a throne she hadn't asked for. A glass of mineral water, untouched, sat before her. She nodded at the appropriate times, smiled when a camera flashed, and endured the fawning compliments of a portly city councilman who kept patting her shoulder. Every touch felt like a violation. She wanted to be in the gym, hitting something. The heavy bag didn't try to make small talk. It didn't pretend to know her. It just took the punishment and asked for more. That was a language she understood. Her eyes swept the room, not with interest, but with a hunter's instinct for assessing a space. She catalogued exits, security guards, and the placement of the TV crews. Her gaze drifted over the catering staff, moving with practiced efficiency along the perimeter. They were part of the scenery, as invisible as the wallpaper. Faceless, nameless, until her eyes snagged on one of them. A young black woman refilling water pitchers at a station near the back wall. There was nothing remarkable about her at first glance. Plain uniform, hair pulled back neatly, but it was the way she moved. There was a quiet economy to her actions, a centered stillness that was completely at odds with the frantic energy of the room. When a waiter jostled past her, spilling a tray of glasses that shattered on the marble floor, the woman didn't jump. She simply sidestepped the chaos with a fluid, balanced motion, her expression unchanged. Jasmine's focus narrowed. In a room full of people, desperate to be seen, this woman seemed perfectly content to be invisible. And for some reason, that irritated Jasmine more than the councilman's clammy hands. It felt like a challenge, a silent, unknowing rebuke of the loud, violent world Jasmine had built around herself. A slow, cruel idea began to form in the back of her mind. A spark of ugly inspiration. The night was intolerably dull. The speeches were long. Her own philanthropy felt like a sham. Perhaps the evening needed a little entertainment. Her kind of entertainment. Leo leaned in, whispering, "You're on in 5, Jazz. Just a few words about the importance of giving back. Keep it warm. Keep it humble." Humble, Jasmine repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She looked back at the woman by the wall, who was now carefully picking up shards of broken glass. A smirk, the real one, not the one for the cameras, finally touched Jasmine's lips. "Oh, I'll give them a lesson in humility, Leo. You can count on it." The applause was thunderous as Jasmine approached the podium. The lights were blinding, but she didn't squint. She owned the light, just like she owned the ring. She stood for a moment, letting the adoration wash over her. It was a drug, and she was an addict. "Thank you," she began, her voice smooth and powerful, resonating through the ballroom. "It's an honor to be here tonight, supporting such a worthy cause. The Children's Hospital does incredible work, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Crowd nodded, their faces full of earnest admiration. From the back of the room, Amara listened as she stacked the last of the cleaned glasses. She'd heard speeches like this before. Rich people talking about fighting, using it as a metaphor for struggles they'd never truly face. To them, a fight was a hostile takeover or a tough negotiation. To Amara, it was the smell of sweat and leather, the sound of a bell, and the feel of her father's steady hand on her shoulder. Jasmine's eyes scanned the crowd again, and with theatrical precision, they locked onto Amara. A hush fell over the room as Jasmine raised a perfectly manicured hand and pointed. "Fighting isn't just a metaphor," Jasmine said, her voice taking on a sharper, more predatory edge. It's about will. It's about who has the strength to stand and who is destined to fall. Her diamond-gloved hand, a gaudy promotional item she was paid to wear, glittered under the spotlights. I look around this room and I see winners. People who take what they want. But true strength, that's something you can only prove in one place. She pointed directly at Amara. The spotlight operator, sensing a dramatic moment, swiveled a beam, and suddenly Amara was bathed in a circle of harsh white light. She froze, a water pitcher in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hundreds of faces turned to stare at her. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "You," Jasmine's voice boomed, laced with a chilling amusement. The woman in the back. The caterer. Amara felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. She was a ghost, a part of the scenery. She wasn't supposed to be seen, not like this. "I have an exhibition fight tomorrow night," Jasmine announced, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "My opponent had to pull out. A last-minute injury." She let that lie settle. "I need a new partner. Someone to help me demonstrate what real fighting is all about." The crowd was mesmerized, caught between shock and morbid curiosity. This wasn't in the program. This was raw, unpredictable, and thrilling. Jasmine's voice dropped, becoming a low, taunting purr. "I'm a philanthropist, so I'll make a donation. A big one. Let's say $100,000 to the hospital. All you have to do is step into the ring with me." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was a monstrous proposition, a public sacrifice. The world champion boxer against a server. Leo looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, mouthing, "No, no, no," from the side of the stage. Jasmine leaned into the microphone. "What do you say? A few minutes in the ring with me. For the children." She said the last words with such dripping condescension, it was an insult in itself. She expected the woman to burst into tears, to stammer a refusal, to shrink away in shame. The humiliation would be exquisite. It would be the jolt of power she'd been craving all night. Amara stood paralyzed in the spotlight, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on her. Every instinct told her to run. But then, through the roaring in her ears, she heard a different voice, a low, gentle rumble from her memory. "Know your worth, baby girl. No one can ever take that from you." She looked at Jasmine Vance, truly looked at her. She saw past the flawless makeup, the expensive clothes, and the championship belt. She saw a deep, profound emptiness, a hollowness that had to be filled by belittling others. And in that instant, Amara's humiliation burned away, replaced by a cold, quiet fire. Her father had never taught her to fight to kill. He'd taught her to fight for respect. Her respect. She set the water pitcher down on the station with a steady hand. The small, solid sound seemed to echo in the cavernous room. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met the champion's gaze across the sea of stunned faces. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was clear. It carried across the silenced ballroom with an authority that no one, least of all Jasmine, expected. "Yes," Amara said. One word. It landed with the force of a body blow. The whispers stopped. The smug smirk vanished from Jasmine's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine disbelief. This wasn't part of the script. The lamb wasn't supposed to agree to the slaughter. "I'll fight you," Amara said, her voice gaining strength. The emotional bomb had been dropped, but it hadn't detonated in the way Jasmine had planned. It had exploded in both of their lives, sending shockwaves that would ripple far beyond the walls of this ballroom. The champion wanted to humiliate a caterer. Instead, she had just awakened a warrior. And in the blinding flash of that moment, both women knew, deep in their bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The penthouse, once a silent kingdom of glass and steel, now felt like a cage, rattling with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. Leo paced back and forth, his face pale, his tablet abandoned on the marble coffee table. He had been shouting for 20 minutes, a mix of pleading and raw panic. "Are you insane, Jasmine? Do you have any idea what you've done?" He finally yelled, his voice cracking. "We're a laughing stock. Champion challenges waitress to charity beatdown." That's the headline on ESPN's homepage. ESPN. Jasmine stood by the window, her back to him, staring down at the city lights. The satisfying jolt of power she'd felt at the gala had curdled into something else. Annoyance. Irritation. The woman was supposed to cry. She was supposed to cower. The clean narrative of domination had been muddied by a single, unexpected word: yes. "Calm down, Leo," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're being hysterical." "Hysterical? I'm being hysterical." He gestured wildly. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing. The sponsors are freaking out. The network is threatening to pull the broadcast. They wanted an exhibition, not a public execution. You can't do this. We have to cancel. We'll say it was a joke, a poorly timed publicity stunt. We'll apologize, make another donation." "No," Jasmine cut him off, turning around. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "We're not canceling anything." "Why?" Leo begged. "What is the point? You get nothing from this. You beat up a civilian. You look like a bully. She gets a lucky punch in, God forbid, and your career's over. There is no upside." "The point," Jasmine hissed, stepping closer, her voice a low growl, "is that she said yes." She stood there, in front of all those people, and she looked me in the eye, and she said yes. No one does that. No one challenges me. You challenged her. She accepted. Jasmine shot back, jabbing a finger into the air. She thinks she can stand in my world. She thinks she has a right to be in my ring. I'm going to show her, and everyone else, what a mistake that is. It'll be fast. It'll be brutal. And it will be a lesson in what happens when people forget their place. This was no longer about quick thrill. Her pride, a brittle and ferocious thing, was now on the line. To back down would be to admit the caterer had gotten the better of her. It would be a show of weakness, and weakness was the one thing she could not tolerate in herself. She was resisting Leo, resisting reason, resisting the gnawing feeling that she had made a terrible, impulsive mistake. She clung to her anger because it was familiar. It was a shield against the unsettling image of that woman's calm, steady gaze. She would not be unnerved. She would dominate. It was the only way she knew how to exist. The rattling of the L train overhead was a familiar rhythm, the soundtrack to Amara's life. But tonight, it sounded like a war drum. She sat on the edge of the tarp-covered ring in her father's gym, the single bare bulb casting long, distorted shadows that danced like ghosts around her. The silence in here was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the impossible weight of what she had just agreed to. What have I done? The question screamed in her mind. Her hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a terrifying, surging cocktail of adrenaline and dread. She wasn't a fighter. Not anymore. For 2 years, she had been a daughter in mourning, a caterer, a ghost. She had methodically dismantled that part of her life, packed it away with her father's belongings. The part that knew how to slip a jab, how to pivot on the ball of her foot, how to breathe through the fire in her lungs. She stood up and walked to a heavy bag, its leather cracked and dry. She ran her hand over its surface. The feel of it was a distant memory. She'd promised herself she was done. The gym held too much pain. The ring was where her father had taken his last breath. How could she step back into one? Especially that one. A ring broadcast to the world, against a champion who wanted to tear her apart for sport. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket. Texts from coworkers, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The media had found her name already. Amara Jones. She could feel the narrative being built around her. The charity case, the pitiful victim, the lamb being led to a televised slaughter. They would all be watching, expecting her to be destroyed. This was resistance of a different kind. It was the resistance of her sensible, grieving self against the buried, sleeping warrior that Jasmine Vance had so crudely awakened. The sensible part of her, the part that paid bills and managed grief, screamed at her to call it off, to apologize, to disappear back into the background where it was safe. She slid the tarp off the ring, the plastic hissing as it came free. The canvas was faded, stained with the sweat and blood of decades. Her father's sanctuary. Her sanctuary. She stepped through the ropes, the familiar bounce of the floorboards a shock to her system. It's not about hitting, baby girl. It's about balance. His voice was so clear in her head. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she raised her hands, settling into a phantom stance. Her body remembered. The muscle memory was deep, coded into her cells. She had resisted this feeling, this identity for so long, burying it under layers of grief and practicality. But Jasmine Vance, with her cruel, careless pride, had dug it all up. Amara's trembling stopped. A profound, bone-deep resolve began to settle in its place. They could call her a victim. They could call her a charity case. They could all tune in to watch her get humiliated. But she knew what her father had taught her. She wasn't stepping into that ring for them. She wasn't even stepping in for the memory of her father. She was stepping in for herself. To reclaim the one thing Jasmine Vance had tried to take from her in that ballroom, her dignity. She would fight. The resistance was over. The conference room at the network headquarters felt like a pressurized airlock. It was sleek, modern, and utterly soulless. On one side of the long, polished table sat Jasmine Vance, flanked by a shell-shocked Leo and a grim-faced network executive. Jasmine projected an aura of bored invincibility, tapping a pen against the table, her expression unreadable. On the other side sat Amara Jones. She had come alone. The forced proximity was a strategic move by the network. After a frantic 24 hours of negotiations, they had decided to lean into the spectacle. It was no longer an exhibition. It was now being billed as the champion and the challenger, an unprecedented showdown. The contracts in front of them were thick, full of clauses and liabilities. The executive, a man named silver-haired man named Miles, cleared his throat. "All right," he said, trying to project authority. "Let's go over the ground rules for the pre-fight press conference. Miss Vance, we're asking for a respectful tone. This is still a charity-affiliated event. Jasmine let out a soft, humorless laugh. Don't worry, Miles. I'll be perfectly respectful while I explain, in detail, how I'm going to dismantle your main event. She looked directly at Amara, her eyes cold and dismissive. This was her arena now. The verbal sparring before the physical. She expected Amara to shrink under her gaze, to look down at the contract she probably couldn't understand. But Amara didn't flinch. She simply met Jasmine's stare, her own expression one of unnerving calm. She hadn't said a word since sitting down, her stillness a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from everyone else. "Do you have any questions, Miss Jones?" Miles asked, a little too loudly. Amara finally broke her silence. "The contract states 3 3-minute rounds, standard 10-ounce gloves, and no headgear. Is that correct?" Her voice was steady, professional. She hadn't asked about the money she would receive, a paltry sum the network had offered as a participation fee. She had asked about the fight. Jasmine's pen stopped tapping. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She had expected questions about safety, about waivers, about how to back out. She hadn't expected a technical query. "That's correct," Miles confirmed, equally surprised. "Good," Amara said, and then she did something no one could have anticipated. She picked up the pen, found the signature line, and signed her name with a firm, confident stroke. No hesitation. The room fell silent. The act was so simple, yet so powerful. It was an acceptance, not just of the terms, but of the entire, insane reality of the situation. An hour later, they were on a brightly lit stage, facing a mob of reporters and flashing cameras. The forced proximity was now public. Jasmine, in her element, took the microphone first. She was theatrical, arrogant, and cruel. "I want to thank Miss Jones for her bravery," she began, the word dripping with sarcasm. "It takes a special kind of courage to volunteer for a public lesson in pain. But this is for a good cause. And the lesson is simple. There are levels to this game. And she and I are not on the same one. We're not even in the same universe." She went on, mocking Amara's job, her lack of experience, her audacity. She was trying to get a reaction, to provoke the tears or anger she'd been denied at the gala. When it was Amara's turn, she walked to the podium. The reporters shouted questions at her. "Are you afraid? What makes you think you can survive one round? Is this a publicity stunt?" Amara waited for the noise to die down. She looked out at the sea of faces. Then she looked at Jasmine, who was watching her with a smug, predatory grin. "I'm not a professional boxer like Miss Vance," Amara said, her voice even and clear. "I work for a living. I serve drinks and I arrange food on trays. And I take pride in my work." She paused. "My father taught me that there is dignity in all work, if you do it honestly. He also taught me how to box. He taught me that the ring isn't about hate or ego or humiliating your opponent. It's about respect. Respect for the sport and respect for yourself." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't trash talk. She simply stated her truth. Her quiet dignity was a shield that Jasmine's verbal attacks couldn't penetrate. It was, in its own way, a form of defense more effective than any she could use in the ring. The press conference ended with the traditional face-off. They were brought to the center of the stage, inches apart, for the cameras. Jasmine stared into Amara's eyes, trying to intimidate her, to find the fear she knew had to be there. But she didn't see fear. She saw a deep, placid lake, a settled calm that seemed to absorb all of her fury and reflect it back at her. And behind that calm, she saw something else. Something that looked like pity. Amara looked into Jasmine's eyes and saw the storm. The raging, lonely, desperate tempest. She saw a champion who had everything and nothing. And for the first time, she felt a pang of something for her opponent that wasn't anger or resentment. It was a strange, unsettling flicker of compassion. They were bound together now, by contracts and by cameras. But in that moment, staring into each other's souls, they were bound by something deeper. A reluctant, unspoken recognition. The fighter who had forgotten how to feel, and the woman who had been forced to feel everything, were now on a collision course. And the ring was waiting. His name was Samuel Jones. He had trained her for 6 months, a secret she kept from her own abusive father. He was her mentor, her protector. And then, one day, her father had found out. He'd stormed into the gym, a whirlwind of drunken fury, and dragged her out by her hair. She remembered the look on Sam's face, a mixture of shock, anger, and profound sadness. He had tried to intervene, but her father had shoved him back, spitting venomous words. "You stay away from my daughter. She's my ticket, not yours." She never saw Sam again. Her father moved them across the country a week later, putting her into a brutal, high-pressure training camp that stripped away everything Sam had taught her about defense and balance, replacing it with pure, relentless aggression. He erased Samuel Jones from her life, but not from her memory. He was the ghost of the fighter she might have become, the person she might have been. Jasmine sank onto the edge of the bed, the folder slipping from her trembling fingers. The pages scattered on the floor. Amara Jones wasn't just a caterer. She was his daughter. Sam's daughter. The little girl from the photos on his gym wall. The one he always spoke about with such fierce, loving pride. "My little hummingbird," he used to call her. The foundation of Jasmine's rage began to crumble, revealing a sinkhole of shame and long-buried grief beneath it. The fight was no longer a simple matter of pride. It was a confrontation with her own past. She was about to step into a ring and willingly, brutally, try to destroy the daughter of the only man who had ever shown her kindness. The carefully constructed walls around her heart, built over 15 years of relentless ambition, began to crack. The invincible champion, the Viper, suddenly felt like that lost, terrified 15-year-old girl all over again. In her own suite down the hall, Amara was preparing in a different way. She wasn't shadowboxing. She was sitting on the floor, her eyes closed, finding her center. The hotel was a foreign planet, the pre-fight hype a roaring noise outside her bubble of calm. She was focused on only one thing, her father's voice in her head. A soft knock came at the door. She expected a hotel employee or a network runner, but when she opened it, she found an elderly woman with kind, wrinkled eyes and a warm smile. She recognized her immediately. Mrs. Gable, from her old neighborhood, the woman whose fried onions scented the air near the gym. "Mrs. Gable, what are you doing here?" Amara asked, shocked. "A few of us from the neighborhood chipped in and got a room," the old woman said, her voice raspy with age. "We weren't about to let you do this alone." She pressed a small, worn, leather-bound book into Amara's hands. "I found this when I was helping you pack up the gym office. I thought you should have it tonight." Amara looked down. It was her father's journal. Not a training log, but his personal diary. A place he'd kept his private thoughts. She had never been able to bring herself to read it. The pain was too fresh. "Thank you," Amara whispered, her throat tight with emotion. After Mrs. Gable left, Amara sat with the journal in her lap for a long time. She could smell the faint scent of linseed oil and old paper clinging to it. With a deep breath, she opened it. His handwriting was a bold, familiar script. She flipped through pages filled with thoughts on his students, notes about the community, and worries about the gym's finances. Then she found a series of entries from about 16 years ago. They were about a new kid who had shown up at the gym. A girl. New girl today, he'd written. Scared as a rabbit, but there's a fire in her. A real fighter's fire. Name's Jasmine. Won't say much about where she came from, but I see the bruises. The kind a man leaves. Reminds me too much of what I ran from myself. Amara's breath caught in her chest. She read on, her eyes flying across the pages. Her father had written about this girl, Jasmine, with a mix of concern and awe. He wrote about her raw power, her speed, but also her deep-seated pain and anger. She's got a cannon for a right hand, one entry read. But she doesn't know how to protect herself. All offense. She leaves her heart wide open for a counterpunch, literally and figuratively. I'm trying to teach her balance, to show her that strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but how well you can stand after being hit. Final entry about the girl was frantic, filled with anguish. Her old man found her. Came in here like a demon. The look in that girl's eyes when he grabbed her, it'll haunt me. I failed her. I let him take her. God, I hope she's okay. I hope she remembers what I taught her. I hope she finds her balance. Amara closed the journal, her hands shaking. Jasmine Vance. She was the girl from her father's past, the lost, bruised soul he had tried to save, the one whose memory had haunted him. The narrative of the arrogant champion, the cruel bully, shattered into a million pieces. Amara was no longer facing a monster. She was facing a fellow student from her father's gym, a woman whose pain mirrored her own in ways she could never have imagined. The fight had started as an act of defiance to protect her own dignity, but it had now transformed into something far more profound. It was a strange, tragic reunion orchestrated by fate. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the memory of her father, and perhaps, in a way she didn't yet understand, she was fighting for Jasmine too. The locker rooms before the fight were universes of contrast. Jasmine's was a hive of activity. Network executives, her publicist, her cutman, all buzzing around her with nervous energy. But Jasmine was a statue in the center of the storm. The discovery about Sam Jones had hollowed her out. Her anger was gone, replaced by a cold, unsettling emptiness. The Viper persona felt like a costume she could no longer wear. Amara's locker room was quiet. Mrs. Gable and a few other neighbors sat on a bench, offering silent, steadfast support. There was no grand strategy session, no hype, just a shared sense of community. Amara wrapped her own hands, the familiar ritual grounding her. Her father had taught her how. The rough gauze felt like a connection to him, to his memory. Just before they were called to the tunnel, an official came to Amara's door. Miss Vance has requested to see you. Alone. Mrs. Gable looked worried. You don't have to, honey. But Amara knew she did. She nodded, following the official down a sterile hallway to a small private room. Jasmine was already there, standing by a concrete wall. She wasn't wearing her silk champion's robe. She was just in her shorts and sports bra, the Vance name stitched on the waistband. For the first time, she just looked like a fighter. A vulnerable one. The silence was heavy. the air thick with 16 years of unspoken history. Jasmine was the first to speak, her voice rough, stripped of its usual arrogance. His name was Samuel Jones. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a confession. Yes, Amara said softly. He was my father. Jasmine's composure, so carefully maintained for so long, finally broke. Her shoulders slumped. He was good to me, she whispered, the words painful, pulled from a place deep inside her. When no one else was. I know, Amara said. I read his journal. Jasmine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a raw, desperate emotion. Shame. Fear. What did it say? It said he was worried about you, Amara replied, her voice gentle. It said he hoped you would find your balance. A single tear, the first in 15 years, escaped Jasmine's eye and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. It felt foreign, a hot, stinging track on her cold skin. The carefully constructed dam had burst. He tried to help me. My father, he wouldn't let him. Confession hung in the air, a ghost finally given voice. In that moment, they weren't champion and challenger. They weren't the viper and the caterer. They were just two women, standing in a stark concrete room, bound by the memory of a good man. The ring, the cameras, the crowd, it all faded away. He would be proud of the fighter you became, Amara said, and she meant it. The champion. Jasmine let out a harsh, broken laugh. This, she said, gesturing to herself. This isn't what he taught me. He taught me defense, control. I became my father. All aggression, all anger. The admission was a weight lifted, and a new one settled in its place. The crushing weight of truth. It's not too late to find your balance, Amara said, echoing her father's words. It wasn't a challenge. It was an offering. A flicker of hope. The bond that formed between them in that small, quiet room was fragile. It was forged in shared pain and a shared connection to a past neither of them had fully understood. A moment of peace, of shared vulnerability, settled between them. It was a strange, impossible truce before a war they both now knew they had to fight. An official knocked on the door. It's time. Jasmine looked at Amara, her eyes full of a conflict that tore at her soul. For the first time, she didn't want to hurt her opponent, but she didn't know how to do anything else. She gave a short, stiff nod. Good luck, Amara. You too, Jasmine, Amara replied. They walked out, separately, towards the roaring tunnel, towards the blinding lights. The fragile bond between them was about to be tested by the brutal reality of the ring. Healing had felt possible for a fleeting moment, but the world was demanding a fight, and a fight was what it was going to get. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wall of sound that hit them as they stepped into the arena. The lights were blinding, the atmosphere electric with the promise of violence. Jasmine walked to the ring with her entourage, the golden championship belt held high, the mask of the viper back in place. But her eyes were different. The fire was gone, replaced by a haunted, conflicted emptiness. Amara walked alone, her face a mask of calm focus. Mrs. Gable and her friends watched from the crowd, their anxious faces lost in the sea of spectators. As she stepped through the ropes, she met Jasmine's gaze across the canvas. The fragile piece of the back room felt a million miles away. Here, under the glare of the world, they were adversaries again. The bell for the first round rang, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the tense silence between them. Jasmine came out fast, as she always did. It was instinct. muscle memory. For a decade, the bell had been a trigger for controlled demolition. But her movements were hesitant. Her punches, usually crisp and brutal, were a fraction of a second slow. She was pulling them ever so slightly. She saw Amara, and she saw Sam's daughter. Amara, in contrast, was a revelation. She moved with the fluid grace her father had described. Her feet were light, her balance impeccable. She wasn't there to trade blows. She was there to box. She slipped Jasmine's telegraphed jabs, pivoted away from the powerful right hand, and used the champion's own aggression against her. She wasn't landing many punches, but she was frustrating Jasmine, making her miss, making her look clumsy. The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't the quick destruction they had been promised. The commentators were stunned. Amara Jones is showing some incredible defensive skill here. Vance looks hesitant, uncharacteristically so. At the end of the first round, Jasmine went back to her corner, her face a storm of confusion and frustration. Her trainer, a grizzled veteran named All, leaned in. "What are you doing, Jazz? This is embarrassing. Are you even trying? This isn't a sparring session. This is your reputation." His words were a slap in the face. Reputation. Pride. The things she had built her entire life on. She looked across the ring and saw Amara, calm, composed, receiving a drink of water. And in that moment, the shame and confusion curdled back into a familiar, toxic emotion, rage. Rage at herself for her weakness. Rage at Amara for making her feel it. She thought Amara's calm was pity. She thought her defense was a form of mockery. The bell for the second round rang. Something in Jasmine snapped. The haunted look was gone, replaced by the cold, dead-eyed fury of the viper. She came out of her corner like a missile. The hesitation was gone. The punches were no longer pulled. They were thrown with vicious, world-class intent. She backed Amara into the ropes with a furious combination. A left hook caught Amara high on the temple, and the world tilted. A brutal right to the body knocked the wind out of her, a gasp escaping her lips. Jasmine didn't let up. This was what she was good at. This was destruction. This was how she silenced the ghosts. Amara tried to defend, to find her balance, but the onslaught was too much. The skill gap was real. The power was overwhelming. A final, devastating right cross slipped past Amara's guard and connected cleanly with her jaw. Amara's world went white, then black. She collapsed to the canvas, the roar of the crowd fading into a dull, distant buzz. The shatter point had arrived. Jasmine stood over her, breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through her. She had won. She had done what she was supposed to do. But as she looked down at Amara's still form on the mat, there was no triumph. There was no satisfaction. There was only a profound, soul-crushing hollowness. She saw the face of Sam's daughter. She heard his voice in her memory. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but how well you can stand after being hit. And in that moment of brutal victory, Jasmine Vance had never felt lower. She had knocked out her opponent, but in the process, she had shattered the fragile bond they had formed. She had shattered the memory of the only man who had ever been kind to her, and she had shattered the last, best part of herself. The referee was counting, but Jasmine wasn't listening. She was lost in the deafening silence of her own broken heart. She had proven she was the champion, but she had lost something far more valuable, the chance for redemption. The aftermath of the knockout was a chaotic whirlwind of noise and motion, but for Jasmine, it was all in slow motion, muted. The referee waved off the fight, Medics rushed into the ring. Leo was trying to hug her, to raise her arm in victory, but she pushed him away. Her eyes were locked on the still form of Amara, who was now being helped by the medical team, her expression dazed but conscious. The victory felt like a funeral. The crowd's cheers sounded like accusations. The championship belt, when it was draped over her shoulder, felt heavier than ever before, a yoke of shame. As she was led from the ring, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Gable in the crowd, her face not angry, but etched with a deep, profound disappointment that was 1,000 times worse than hatred. That look would haunt her more than any punch she had ever taken. Back in her locker room, the celebratory atmosphere she had expected was non-existent. The network executives and hangers-on had vanished, sensing the strange, somber mood. Only Leo remained, trying to spin the narrative. It was a clean knockout, Jazz. A little slow on the start, but you did what you had to do. You're the champ. That's the story, he said, his voice lacking its usual conviction. Jasmine didn't hear him. She was staring at her reflection in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't a champion. It was the face of her father, ruthless, empty, alone. The victory hadn't silenced the ghosts. It had invited them in to stay. She had made her choice in that second round. She had chosen pride over vulnerability, violence over connection. And now, alone in the silence of her supposed triumph, the pain of it was a physical ache in her chest, sharper than any punch. She had spent her entire life running from the person her father had tried to make her, only to become his perfect creation in the end. The choice had been made, but the reckoning was just beginning. Was this it? Was this all her life would ever be? A series of brutal victories followed by this same echoing emptiness? It's not too late to find your balance. Amara's words from the back room echoed in her mind. Was it true, or was that a foolish hope she had just extinguished with her own gloved fist? She looked at her hands, the instruments of her victory and her shame. She had to do something. To stay here, to accept this hollow win, was to accept that she was lost for good. Slowly, deliberately, she began to unwrap her hands. The choice wasn't over. There was one more to be made. Not in the ring, but in her own heart. Amara sat on a cot in the small infirmary backstage, a doctor shining a penlight into her eyes. The diagnosis was a mild concussion and a badly bruised jaw, but the physical pain was a dull throb compared to the ache of disappointment. She hadn't been disappointed that she lost. She had known, realistically, that was the most likely outcome. She was disappointed in what the fight had become. For one round, it had been a chess match. It had been about her father's teachings, about balance and respect. Then, in the second, it had become exactly what she had feared, a brutal display of dominance. She had seen the shift in Jasmine's eyes. She had seen the moment the hurt, conflicted woman had been consumed by the remorseless viper. It felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of the fragile bond they had formed. Mrs. Gable sat beside her, holding a bag of ice to her cheek. "You were so brave, honey," she said softly. "I lost, Mrs. Gable," Amara murmured, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "You stood up," the old woman corrected her gently. "In front of the whole world, you stood up. Your father, he would have been so proud of how you stood. Not that you fell." Her words were a balm on Amara's bruised spirit. She was right. She had honored her father. She had honored herself. She hadn't won the fight, but she hadn't lost her dignity. She was cleared to leave, and as she walked slowly down the quiet, empty hallway, she thought about Jasmine. She could choose to see her as the monster from the second round, She could choose to hold on to the anger and the pain of that knockout. It would be easy. It would be justified. Or she could choose to remember the terrified 15-year-old girl from her father's journal. She could remember the single tear on the champion's cheek in the back room. She reached the exit that led to the parking garage, to a quiet ride home and a return to her life. But she stopped. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Avoidance or truth? Pride or vulnerability? She had faced her opponent in the ring. Now she had to decide if she was willing to face the broken woman behind the fighter. With a deep breath, she turned around and began walking toward the champion's locker room. Jasmine was sitting on the bench, her head in her hands, when the door to her locker room creaked open. She looked up, expecting Leo, and her breath hitched. Amara stood in the doorway. Her face was swollen, a dark bruise already forming on her jaw, but her eyes were clear and steady. She didn't look angry. She just looked present. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely a whisper. She felt a wave of shame, so intense it was dizzying. She couldn't even look at the damage she had inflicted. "I came to see if you were okay," Amara said simply. The words struck Jasmine with the force of a physical blow. Of all the things she had expected, it wasn't that. Not compassion. Not from the woman she had just brutalized. "If I'm okay?" she repeated, incredulous. "Look at you." "This will heal," Amara said, gesturing to her face. "It's what's in here that's harder to fix." She tapped her chest, right over her heart. She was talking about both of them. Jasmine finally stood up, taking a hesitant step forward. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate, but utterly sincere. "Amara, I saw you in there, and I got scared. I don't know how to be anything else but that." "I know," Amara said. "My father knew, too. He wrote that you left your heart open for a counterpunch." The memory of the fight, of the connection, of the shared history washed over them. The sterile locker room felt, for a moment, like a sacred space. "What he taught you, the balance, the control, it's still in you," Amara continued, her voice soft but firm. "I felt it in that first round, before you got scared." This was the final reckoning. Jasmine's whole life had been about proving she was strong enough to stand alone. But for the first time, she realized true strength might be the courage to not have to. She looked at Amara, at the woman who had every right to hate her, who was instead offering her a lifeline. "How do you do it?" Jasmine asked, her voice breaking. "How do you stand there after what I did and not hate me?" "Because my father never taught me to fight with hate," Amara replied. "He taught me that the ring is just a place. The real fight is about who you choose to be when the bell stops ringing." In that moment, Jasmine Vance, the undefeated champion of the world, finally laid down her weapons. She closed the distance between them, and, with a hesitation that spoke volumes, she reached out and gently hugged Amara. It was awkward, clumsy, the hug of someone who had forgotten how. Amara was stiff for a second, surprised, before she relaxed and returned to the embrace. They stood there for a long moment, two fighters holding each other up in the quiet aftermath of a battle that had been about so much more than a belt. The resolution didn't come with trumpets or a press conference. It came in a quiet locker room, in a shared moment of grace. A few weeks later, a bulldozer sat idle in front of the Jones Boxing Club. But it wasn't there to demolish the building. It was there for renovations. A massive banner hung over the crooked old sign, freshly painted, the Jones Vance Youth Boxing Academy. Inside, the gym was filled with light and the sounds of life. New heavy bags hung next to the old, lovingly restored ones. The ring, its canvas now pristine white, was full of kids, boys and girls of all ages, learning how to wrap their hands, how to find their footing. Amara moved among them, her voice a gentle echo of her father's, teaching, encouraging. And beside her, wearing simple sweats instead of silk robes, was Jasmine. She wasn't coaching aggression. She was teaching defense. She was showing a small, shy girl how to pivot, how to keep her guard up, how to find her balance. They caught each other's eye across the bustling gym. No words were needed. A small, genuine smile passed between them, a smile of shared purpose, of mutual respect. Jasmine had found her balance, not by avoiding the ring, but by changing what it meant to her. Amara had saved her father's legacy, not by preserving it in dust, but by breathing new life into it. The final emotional echo arrived when a young girl, frustrated with her footwork, looked up at Jasmine. "This is too hard," she mumbled, her lip trembling. Jasmine knelt down, her expression one of profound gentleness, the one she'd learned from Sam and been reminded of by Amara. She looked the girl in the eye and said the words that had been buried in her for so long, finally redeemed. "I know it's hard, but strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how well you can stand. Now, let's try it again. Together." This journey of theirs, from a cruel challenge to a shared future, leaves us with a powerful question. At the end of the day, when our own battles are fought, what truly defines our victory? Is it the titles we win, or the connections we refuse to let die? Share your thoughts on this in the comments. We can all learn from each other. Thank you for joining me for this story. Your presence here means the world. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.